The sun-baked asphalt of Route 66 shimmered like a mirage as Jake Reaper Morrison's Harley rumbled into Copper Falls, Arizona, population 847. This wasn't supposed to be a stop. He was running from the Serpents MC, from 3 years of blood money and broken bones, from the kind of darkness that stained your soul black. Then he heard her voice cut through the desert silence. "Please, sir, help me." The bride stood chained behind the diner's kitchen window, her wedding dress torn and stained with desperation. Her eyes found his through the glass, terrified, pleading, alive when everything else in this godforsaken town felt dead. Jake's hands tightened on his handlebars. 20 years ago, he'd been Special Forces, before the MC, before he forgot what it meant to be the good guy. The town sheriff emerged from the diner, badge gleaming, smile cold as winter. 3 men flanked him, armed, watching. This wasn't random. Someone was selling girls in the middle of nowhere, and Jake had just become their biggest problem. But what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted, and saving an angel might damn them both? The engine's rumble died as Jake cut the ignition, his boots hitting gravel with deliberate slowness. The sheriff's smile never wavered, but his hand drifted toward his service weapon. Professional paranoia. Jake recognized it because he'd lived it. "Afternoon, stranger." The sheriff's voice carried the lazy drawl of a man used to being the biggest predator in a small pond. "Sheriff Daniels." "You lost?" Jake's eyes flicked back to the window. The girl was gone, but the image burned behind his retinas. White lace against dirty glass, fear so raw it had its own scent. He'd seen that look before, in villages across Afghanistan, in faces of people who knew death was coming. "Bike's running hot," Jake said, dismounting with the fluid grace that came from years of riding and fighting. "Thought I'd grab some water." Let her cool down. One of Daniel's men shifted, revealing the grip of a Glock beneath his jacket. Not standard civilian carry, these guys had military training. Jake catalogued the positions automatically, 2 flanking the entrance, 1 by the propane tank's sheriff center stage. Classic box formation. "Frank's Diner's got the coldest beer this side of Phoenix," Daniel said, but his eyes were calculating, measuring threat levels. "Course, we don't get many visitors, especially ones with—" He gestured at Jake's cut, the serpent's colors still visible despite the tape Jake had slapped over them. Interesting associations. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of creosote and something else, fierce sweat, the metallic tang of blood. Jake had spent enough time in hell to recognize its perfume. "Just passing through," Jake said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. The girl's voice echoed in his head, cutting through 3 years of self-imposed numbness. When was the last time someone had asked him for help instead of begging for mercy? "Shame," Daniel said. "Pretty girl inside could use some company. Been real homesick lately." The casual cruelty in his tone made Jake's vision tinge red at the edges. He'd killed men for less, back when killing came easier than breathing, but that life was supposed to be behind him. He was trying to be better, trying to outrun the monster the serpents had turned him into. "That right?" Jake kept his voice level, but his fingers twitched toward the knife on his belt. "Oh yeah, she's getting married real soon, to whoever's got the highest bid." Daniel's grin was all teeth and malice. "Supply and demand, you understand. Pretty white girls bring premium prices south of the border." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Human trafficking. He'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed unleashed something primal in his chest. The same protective rage that had driven him to join the army, to serve something bigger than himself, before the serpents corrupted it all. A crash came from inside the diner, followed by a man's angry voice. "Stupid bitch," knocked over the sound cut off abruptly, but Jake heard what followed, a woman's sob, quickly muffled. Daniels watched Jake's reaction with predatory interest. "Problem, friend?" Jake looked at the diner, at the armed men, at the badge that was supposed to mean protection, but here meant something far darker. The smart play was to walk away, mount his bike, ride into the sunset, let Copper Falls keep its secrets. He had his own problems. The serpents would be looking for him, and staying in one place too long meant a bullet in the back of his head. But smart had never been his strong suit. "No problem," Jake said finally. "Just thirsty." He started toward the diner, feeling 4 sets of eyes tracking his movement. Behind that window, a girl in a wedding dress was waiting to die, or worse. And Jake Morrison was about to remember what it felt like to be a hero again, even if it killed him. The rumble of Jake's Harley echoed off the canyon walls as he descended into Perdition's Valley, a town that looked like God had forgotten it existed. Heat waves shimmered off the cracked asphalt, distorting the ramshackle buildings ahead like a fever dream. He'd been riding for 6 hours straight, running from ghosts that seemed to follow him no matter how many miles he put between himself and Phoenix. The gas gauge needle kissed empty, forcing him to pull into the only station in sight, a weathered shell of concrete and rust with 2 ancient pumps standing like sentinels in the desert. A hand-painted sign reading "Pete's Last Chance" hung crooked above the office door. Jake killed the engine and stretched his cramped muscles, leather chaps creaking as he dismounted. The silence was absolute except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. He'd chosen this route specifically to avoid civilization, to find somewhere he could think without the weight of his reputation crushing down on him. The station attendant emerged from the office, a wiry man with sun-weathered skin and suspicious eyes that catalogued every detail of Jake's appearance. The colors on his vest, the scars on his knuckles, the way he carried himself with the coiled tension of someone who'd survived too many fights. "You're not from around here," the man stated. Not a question. Just passing through. Jake began pumping gas, the mechanical rhythm oddly soothing. "This the only game in town?" "Depends what game you're playing." The attendant spat into the dust. "Most folks who end up here ain't exactly tourists." Something in the man's tone made Jake glance up. There was fear there, carefully hidden but unmistakable to someone who'd learned to read people's tells, the kind of fear that came from living under someone else's thumb. "Trouble in paradise?" Jake asked casually. The man's eyes darted toward the town, then back to Jake's bike. "Mister, you seem like the type who knows how to handle himself, so I'm going to give you some free advice. Fill your tank and keep riding. Nothing good happens to strangers who linger in Perdition's Valley." The pump clicked off, and Jake replaced the nozzle slowly, his instincts prickling. He'd spent 15 years in the Reaper's MC, and he knew the smell of criminal enterprise when it hit his nostrils. This place reeked of it. What kind of nothing good? Before the attendant could answer, a black SUV roared past on the main road, kicking up a cloud of dust. Through the swirling dirt, Jake caught a glimpse of multiple figures in the vehicle and something else, a flash of white fabric in the back window that looked almost like, "That's my answer right there," the attendant muttered, retreating toward his office. $43.50 for the gas. Jake followed him inside, noting how the man's hands shook as he worked the register. The office was a time capsule from the 70s, complete with yellowing girly calendars and a CB radio crackling with static. But it was the missing persons flyers taped to the wall that caught Jake's attention. At least a dozen photos of young women, their smiles frozen in time. "Lot of people go missing around here," Jake observed. "Desert's dangerous. People get lost, run out of water." The attendant's voice was flat, rehearsed. "That'll be $43.50. Jake laid the money on the counter, but didn't move to leave. One of the flyers showed a girl who couldn't have been more than 19, blonde hair and blue eyes full of life. The description listed her as last seen wearing a white sundress. "When's the last time someone was actually found?" "Mister, I don't know what you're thinking, but whatever it is, think again." The attendant leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Some stones are better left unturned. Trust me on that." Jake studied the man's face, seeing the war between conscience and self-preservation playing out in real time. He'd worn that same expression himself more times than he cared to count, back when the Reapers had him doing things that still woke him up in cold sweats. "I appreciate the warning," Jake said finally, pocketing his change. But as he turned to leave, the CB radio crackled to life. Base to Unit 3, the package is secure. Repeat, package is secure. Boss wants the ceremony moved up to tonight. The attendant lunged for the radio, switching it off with panicked urgency. In the sudden silence, Jake's blood ran cold. He'd heard enough coded language in his criminal past to know exactly what package and ceremony meant in a place like this. Outside, his Harley sat waiting in the punishing sun, pointing toward the open road and the freedom it promised. All he had to do was climb on and ride away from whatever darkness had taken root in this forgotten corner of hell. Instead, Jake found himself staring down the dusty road where the SUV had disappeared. That flash of white fabric burned into his memory like a brand. Some stones, he thought, needed turning. The engine's rumble died as Marcus killed the Harley outside Rosie's diner, a weathered building that looked like it had been baking in the desert sun since the 50s. Neon buzzed weakly in the window, advertising Coors and homemade pie. He needed coffee, food, and information, not necessarily in that order. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, his boots echoing on checkered linoleum. The place was nearly empty except for a trucker hunched over eggs at the counter and two men in expensive suits who looked completely out of place. They glanced up when he entered, their eyes lingering a moment too long on his leather jacket and the scars visible on his knuckles. "Sit anywhere, hun," called a waitress with graying hair and tired eyes. Her name tag read Betty. She had the look of someone who'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. Marcus chose a booth with a clear view of the door and the two suits. Old habits. The waitress ambled over with a coffee pot and a menu that had seen better decades. "You just passing through?" she asked, filling his cup without being asked. "Maybe. Depends what's here worth staying for." Betty's laugh was dry as desert wind. "Nothing's worth staying for in Cedar Flats. Most folks with any sense keep on driving. What about folks without sense?" Her expression shifted, became guarded. They tend to find trouble, or trouble finds them. She glanced toward the men in suits, then back to Marcus. "What'll it be? Burger, fries, and maybe you can tell me about the wedding I saw getting set up." The coffee pot trembled slightly in Betty's grip. "Wedding? Big white tent, lots of flowers. Looked expensive for a town this size." "Oh, that." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Some rich family from the city. They like the privacy out here." "Privacy's important," Marcus agreed, watching her carefully, "especially for special occasions." The bride looked young. Betty's face went pale. She set the coffee pot down harder than necessary. "I'll get your order started." As she hurried away, Marcus noticed the two suits had stopped eating. One was typing on his phone while watching Marcus in the mirror behind the counter. The other had his hand inside his jacket, a position Marcus recognized all too well. The trucker threw money on the counter and left without finishing his eggs. Smart man. Marcus sipped his coffee and waited. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Finally, the suit stood and walked over to his booth. The first was tall and lean with dead eyes. The second was broader, with hands that suggested he was more than just muscle. "You ask a lot of questions for someone just passing through," said the tall one, sliding into the seat across from Marcus. "Curious mind. It's a character flaw. Could be a dangerous one, in the wrong place." The broad one remained standing, blocking Marcus's view of the door. "This is the wrong place. For asking about weddings. For asking about anything." The tall man leaned forward. "See, we value privacy here. People who don't respect that." He shrugged. "Well, the desert's big and empty." Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "That sounds like a threat. Just friendly advice. Finish your coffee, get back on that bike, and keep riding. Forget whatever you think you saw. And if I don't..." The broad man's jacket fell open, revealing a shoulder holster. "Then you'll have an accident. Desert roads can be treacherous." Marcus studied them both, calculating distances and angles. He could take them, probably. The tall one was all talk, but the broad one was dangerous. The question was whether it was worth the exposure. He was supposed to be keeping a low profile, staying out of trouble. Then he thought about the girl in the white dress, the terror in her eyes, the way she'd mouthed those desperate words. "Help me." "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of a dozen years riding with the devils. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He stood slowly, hands visible, but his posture shifted into something predatory. The broad man's hand moved toward his gun, but Marcus was already speaking. "I'm not some lost tourist asking stupid questions. I've buried men for less than what you just said to me." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "So here's my friendly advice. Walk away. Now, before I decide your boss needs to find new help." For a long moment, nobody moved. Betty cowered behind the counter. The tension crackled like electricity before a storm. The tall man's eyes narrowed as he tried to read Marcus, to figure out if he was bluffing. What he saw there made him slide back out of the booth. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Marcus replied, settling back into his seat. "It isn't." They left, but not before the broad one dropped a 20 on the counter. Too much for coffee, too little for silence. Marcus waited until their sedan disappeared down the highway before calling Betty over. "Now," he said quietly, "tell me about the girl." The engine's rumble died as Jake killed the ignition, leaving only the whisper of desert wind through broken glass. The abandoned gas station squatted like a wounded animal against the horizon, its rusted pumps standing sentinel over cracked asphalt. He'd chosen this place deliberately, visible from the road but isolated enough for what needed to happen. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later in a black sedan that screamed federal budget. The man who stepped out looked like every FBI agent from Central Casting, pressed suit, regulation haircut, and the kind of confidence that came from having Uncle Sam's backing. Jake remained seated on his bike, arms crossed, letting Marcus come to him. Marcus smiled without humor. "Maybe both. Your message said you had information about human trafficking. That's a serious allegation. Everything I touch is serious these days." Jake stood slowly, his leather jacket creaking. "There's a ring operating out of Salvation, high-end stuff, young women, probably international. They've got local law enforcement in their pocket. Evidence, working on it." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "That's not how this works, Jake. You can't just call me with vague accusations and expect the Bureau to move. We need proof, names, dates, locations." The image of Elena's terrified face flashed through Jake's mind. The way her hand had trembled when she reached for him, the desperate hope in her voice. He'd seen that look before, in other places, other times when he'd been too late to matter. "There's a girl," he said quietly. "Early 20s, dark hair, foreign accent. She's being held against her will." "Where?" "Still working on that part." Marcus threw his hands up. "Christ, Jake, you're giving me nothing here. You want me to raid a town based on your gut feeling about some girl you might have seen?" The dismissive tone hit Jake wrong. His fists clenched, old reflexes firing. "She's not some girl. She's a victim, and she asked for help." Okay. Marcus raised his palms in a calming gesture. "Tell me what you know. Everything." Jake walked him through it. The wedding dress, Elena's plea, Sheriff Crenshaw's convenient timing, the town's artificial feel. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes on his phone. "The sheriff's definitely dirty," Marcus said when Jake finished. "But the rest, it's circumstantial. Could be a domestic situation, runaway bride, cold feet. You didn't see her eyes." "No, I didn't. But judges don't issue warrants based on eyes, Jake. They want hard evidence." A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp against the silence. Jake watched it hunt, patient and focused. That's what this would take. Patience he wasn't sure he had. "How long to get a team together if I bring you proof?" "Depends on the proof. If it's solid, financial records, communications, physical evidence, maybe 48 hours. We'd coordinate with ICE and local task forces." "Local task forces?" Jake laughed bitterly. "Did you miss the part about corrupt cops? Not all of them. There are good people in law enforcement, Jake. Hard to believe, I know, given your history." The words stung because they were true. Jake's relationship with authority had been complicated long before his fall from grace. Growing up with a father who wore a badge by day and dealt pain by night had left scars that ran deeper than his tattoos. What about protection for the girl? Marcus's expression softened slightly. If she's really in danger, we'll get her out. Safe house, new identity if needed. The Bureau takes care of its witnesses. Jake thought about Elena's frightened face, wondered if she was safe at this moment or if his clumsy intervention had made things worse. The not knowing ate at him like acid. "I need 3 days," he said. "For what?" "To get you what you need." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You're planning something stupid, aren't you?" "I'm planning something necessary." "Jake." 3 days, Marcus. Then we do this right, or I do it alone." The agent sighed, suddenly looking older than his 40-something years. "You know I can't officially sanction whatever you're thinking of doing." "Wouldn't ask you to." Marcus walked back toward his sedan, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I hope you're wrong about this, for the girl's sake." Jake watched the black car disappear into the desert haze, then climbed back on his bike. 3 days to save Elena and maybe his own soul in the process. He'd worked with less time and longer odds. The engine roared to life, drowning out the voice in his head that whispered he was already too late. The warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake pressed himself against the corrugated metal wall, listening to the rhythmic snoring from inside the guard shack. 2 men, maybe 3. His fingers traced the outline of the bolt cutters he'd lifted from a construction site on the edge of town. The chain-link fence had been easy enough to breach, but getting Elena out would be the real challenge. He'd spent the better part of the night observing the compound from a ridge overlooking the valley. The main building housed at least a dozen girls, based on the fleeting shadows he'd glimpsed through barred windows. Armed guards rotated every 4 hours. 3 vehicles parked near the entrance, 2 black SUVs and a panel van that made his stomach turn thinking about its purpose. The smart play would be to call the authorities, let them handle it. But Jake had learned long ago that smart plays didn't always work in towns where money talked louder than justice. Besides, by the time federal agents mobilized, Elena and the others could be moved or worse. His hand instinctively went to his jacket pocket, where he'd carried a flask for the better part of 3 years, empty now for 6 months, but the weight of it had become a comfort. Tonight, he wished he had something stronger than adrenaline coursing through his veins. A door creaked open somewhere in the compound. Jake flattened himself deeper into the shadows as footsteps crunched across gravel. A guard emerged from the main building, cigarette glowing orange in the darkness. The man stretched, checked his watch, and began a lazy patrol around the perimeter. Jake counted the seconds. 43 steps to complete the circuit. The guard moved with the casual indifference of someone going through the motions, probably figuring nothing interesting ever happened in this godforsaken corner of nowhere. Wrong place to get complacent. When the guard disappeared around the far corner, Jake sprinted across the open ground to the main building. The windows were too high and too heavily barred to be useful, but the ventilation system, industrial units bolted to the roof with ductwork that looked decades old, might offer another option. He found a service ladder welded to the building's rear wall. Each rung protested under his weight with soft metallic groans that seemed to echo like gunshots in the stillness. At the roof level, he discovered what he'd hoped for, a maintenance hatch into the main ductwork, secured with nothing more than wing nuts that had probably been loosened and retightened 1,000 times. The duct was a tight fit for his broad shoulders, but he managed to squeeze through. The metal amplified every sound, his breathing, the whisper of fabric against steel, the distant murmur of voices below. He crawled forward, following the main line toward what he guessed was the center of the building. Light leaked up through a ceiling vent. Jake positioned himself over it and peered down into a narrow hallway lined with doors, heavy-duty locks on the outside. His jaw clenched at the implications. A woman's voice drifted up from somewhere nearby, speaking rapid Spanish. Another voice answered, younger, frightened. Then Elena's voice, barely audible but unmistakable, offering comfort in accented English. "It's going to be okay. Help is coming." The certainty in her tone caught him off guard. How could she sound so confident when she had no reason to believe anyone even knew where she was? Jake worked his way along the ductwork until he found a vent that offered a view into what appeared to be a common area. Elena sat on a thin mattress against the far wall, her wedding dress now torn and stained but her posture still defiant. 5 other women huddled nearby, ranging in age from maybe 16 to 30. The younger ones looked shell-shocked, but Elena was clearly trying to keep their spirits up despite their circumstances. A door slammed somewhere in the building. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by voices speaking in what sounded like Russian. Elena immediately shifted position, placing herself between the other women and the door. 3 men entered the room. The leader wore an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place in the warehouse setting. His companions carried themselves with the casual alertness of professional muscle. "Ladies," the suited man said in heavily accented English, "I trust you've had time to consider your situations. Tomorrow you begin your new lives. Those who cooperate will find the transition much more pleasant than those who resist." Elena stood slowly, her chin raised. "We're not merchandise. People will be looking for us." The man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Perhaps, but not in places they will think to search." He gestured toward the door. "Rodriguez will explain your duties. I suggest you listen carefully." As the men filed out, Elena's composure finally cracked slightly. Jake saw her hands trembling as she sat back down, though she kept her expression neutral for the benefit of the other women. Jake had seen enough. He began working his way back through the ductwork, his mind racing through possibilities. Direct assault was suicide, too many armed men, too many potential casualties. But maybe he didn't need to fight his way in. Maybe he just needed the right kind of distraction. The motel room felt like a cage as Maya paced the narrow strip between the beds, her wedding dress now a bitter reminder of the nightmare she'd escaped. Jake sat on the edge of the far bed, his massive frame making the furniture look like it belonged in a dollhouse. He'd been quiet since they'd arrived, methodically cleaning and checking his weapons with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. "Tell me about the others," he said without looking up from the pistol in his hands. Maya's steps faltered. "What others? You said there were more girls. How many? Where are they keeping them?" The clinical way he asked made her stomach turn, but she recognized the necessity behind his questions. If she wanted his help, really wanted it, she had to give him everything. 6 that I saw," she whispered, sinking onto the opposite bed. "Maybe more. They keep us separated most of the time. Different rooms, different buyers." The last word stuck in her throat like broken glass. Jake's hands stilled on the weapon. "Ages?" "Young. Too young. The youngest couldn't be more than 15. Tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. They told us what would happen if we tried to run. They said they had people everywhere, that we'd never make it out of the desert alive. They might not be wrong about that." Jake's honesty was brutal but somehow comforting. At least he wasn't feeding her false hope. The desert's not forgiving, especially if you don't know where you're going. He set the gun aside and looked at her directly for the first time since they'd entered the room. His eyes were the color of winter storms, hard and unforgiving, but she caught something else there, a flicker of the same rage that had driven him to kill Martinez. "This buyer of yours," he continued. "Rich guy from the city?" "I think so. Victor said he paid extra for—" She couldn't finish. "For what, Maya?" "For a virgin bride, someone untouched." The words came out barely above a whisper. "He's supposed to arrive tomorrow night for the ceremony." Jake's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble. "Ceremony? They make it look legitimate. Dress it up like a real wedding to make the buyers feel better about what they're doing." The bitter laugh that escaped her held no humor, as if signing fake papers makes it less rape. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stood abruptly and moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out at the empty parking lot. His leather vest stretched across broad shoulders that carried more tension than any man should have to bear. "You know I can't just walk away from this," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to go back. I know it's dangerous." "No." He turned around, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You don't understand. I can't walk away because if I do, I'll never be able to live with myself. Those girls, they're going to keep suffering until someone stops it." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Someone like you? I've done worse things for worse people." His voice carried the weight of old sins and older regrets. "Maybe it's time I did something that actually mattered." She studied his face, searching for any sign that he was making promises he couldn't keep. Instead, she found something that surprised her: determination tempered by genuine grief for girls he'd never met. "Why?" she asked. "You could just take me to the nearest town with a police station and wash your hands of all this. Why risk your life for strangers?" Jake was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "I had a sister once, Elena. She was about your age when she disappeared." He moved away from the window, his steps heavy with memory. "Found out later she'd gotten mixed up with some bad people. By the time I tracked them down, it was too late." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Maya felt something shift in her chest, not just gratitude for his protection, but recognition of shared pain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I." Jake picked up his gun again, but his movements were gentler now, almost reverent. "I couldn't save Elena, but maybe I can save them. Save you. What's the plan?" "First, we need intel. Layout of the compound, number of guards, where they're keeping the girls." He looked up at her with something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Think you can remember enough details to help me get us both killed?" Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the very real possibility that they wouldn't survive the next 24 hours, Maya found herself almost smiling back. "I can do better than that," she said. "I can get us back inside." The motel room felt smaller with every passing hour. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, methodically cleaning his Glock while Sophia paced near the window, careful to stay away from the thin curtains. The silence between them had grown comfortable over the past day, punctuated only by her occasional questions about the outside world and his gruff responses about their next moves. "Tell me about your family," Sophia said suddenly, settling into the worn chair across from him. His hands stilled on the weapon. "Nothing to tell. Everyone has family. Someone who cares." Ethan resumed his cleaning, the metallic clicks filling the space. "Had a sister once, Emma. She was good, pure, everything I wasn't." Sophia's voice softened. "What happened to her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ethan had never spoken about Emma to anyone in the club, never let that wound see daylight. But something about Sophia's earnest brown eyes made the words spill out despite himself. "She got mixed up with the wrong crowd trying to help me. I was 17, stupid, running with dealers. Emma was only 15, but she thought she could save me." He set the gun aside, his jaw tight. "She followed me to a deal one night. Things went sideways, shots fired. She caught a bullet meant for me." Sophia's intake of breath was sharp. "Ethan, that's when I knew I was poison. Everything I touched turned to ash." He looked at her directly for the first time since beginning the story. "Joined the Serpents a month after her funeral. Figured if I was going to destroy lives, might as well make a living at it." She leaned forward, her voice fierce. "You didn't pull that trigger?" "No." Sophia stood, moving closer. "I know what real monsters look like, remember? You're not one of them." Before he could respond, his burner phone buzzed. Unknown number, but only 3 people had this line. He answered with a cautious grunt. "Ghost?" The voice was gravelly, unfamiliar. "Who's asking?" "Name's Detective Ray Morrison, Vegas PD. Your friend Jake Martinez gave me this number. Said you might have information about a trafficking operation." Ethan's eyes found Sophia's, noting the hope that flared there. "Could be. Depends what you're offering." "Protection for the girl, full immunity for you, and a chance to burn these bastards to the ground. Jake says you pulled her out of hell. That true? What's Jake told you? Everything. The compound, Marcus Webb, the whole setup. We've been tracking this ring for 2 years, but we needed someone on the inside. You just handed us our break. Ethan processed this. Jake had taken a massive risk reaching out to law enforcement, but it meant they weren't completely alone anymore. What do you need? The girl's testimony, everything she knows about their operation, locations, names. And I need you to get her to Vegas safely. We've got a safe house set up, federal marshals standing by. How do I know you're legit? Because Jake's sitting right here next to me, and he's got some colorful things to say about your trust issues. Morrison's tone shifted, becoming more serious. Look, Ghost, I've been working human trafficking cases for 15 years. I've seen what these animals do to people. If this girl made it out alive and you're the reason why, then you're already more of a hero than most cops I know. Sophia had moved close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. She nodded at him, her expression determined. Vegas is 8 hours, Ethan said. We'll need... The sound of motorcycles cut through the desert air outside, multiple bikes, engines rumbling in that familiar pattern he knew by heart. Serpent bikes. Shit. Ethan killed the call and grabbed his gun. They found us. Sophia's face went white. How many? He peered through a gap in the curtains. 6 bikes, riders dismounting with military precision. Marcus wasn't among them, but Spider was, along with Venom and 4 prospects eager to prove themselves. 6. Maybe more coming. His mind raced through options. The bathroom window was too small, and the front door was the only exit. They were boxed in. There's something I didn't tell you, Sophia whispered urgently, about why they kept me specifically. Now's not the time for... I'm Senator Rodriguez's daughter. The words hit him like a physical blow. Senator Maria Rodriguez, the anti-trafficking crusader who'd been making headlines for her legislation. That changed everything about their situation, about the resources hunting them, about what Sophia was worth to both sides. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Heavy footsteps approached their door. Spider's voice carried through the thin walls. We know you're in there, Ghost. Marcus wants his property back. Come out easy, and maybe we don't burn the whole place down. Ethan looked at Sophia, seeing not just the frightened girl he'd rescued, but a political firestorm that could topple governments. The stakes had just gotten infinitely higher. Stay behind me, he whispered, checking his ammunition, and get ready to run. The motel room felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, his leather jacket draped across his shoulders, watching Elena sleep. She'd finally drifted off an hour ago, her breathing shallow but steady. Every few minutes she'd whimper softly, lost in nightmares he could only imagine. He pulled out another phone, one Elena didn't know about, and dialed a number he'd memorized but never used. Vega. The voice was crisp, federal. It's Reeves. A pause. Jesus Christ, Marcus, where the hell are you? That's not important right now. I've got something you want. I'm listening. Rodriguez. His whole operation. Routes, safe houses, client lists, everything. In exchange for? Marcus glanced back at the motel room window. Protection for a witness, full immunity, new identity, the works. What kind of witness? The kind that can put Rodriguez away forever. Another pause. This witness wouldn't happen to be a certain missing bride from yesterday's raid, would she? Marcus's blood went cold. What raid? El Paso PD hit one of Rodriguez's properties last night. Found it empty, but there were signs of recent activity. Blood, women's clothing. We know someone was there, and we know someone took her. You've been watching me. Not you specifically, but when a Devils member starts asking questions about missing girls and then vanishes the same night as our operation, it raises flags. Marcus closed his eyes. He'd been careless, left a trail. How long do I have? Rodriguez's people are already mobilizing. Our intel says he's put $100,000 bounty on both of you, dead or alive. The motel room door creaked open behind him. Elena stood silhouetted in the doorway, wearing his spare T-shirt that hung to her knees. Her dark hair caught the neon light like spun copper. "Who are you talking to?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus ended the call without another word. "Someone who can help us." "FBI?" She wasn't stupid. The tension in his shoulders, the way he'd positioned himself between her and the parking lot, she could read the signs. Maybe. No. She stepped outside, bare feet on cold concrete. "No federal agents. They'll just hand me back to—" "They won't." Marcus caught her arm gently. "I won't let them. You don't understand. Rodriguez has people everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. He told me about them, made sure I knew there was nowhere to run." Tears gathered in her eyes. "The FBI came to investigate him before. 3 agents. 2 ended up dead, 1 disappeared." Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to me." The voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent. "Rodriguez. She doesn't belong to anyone. Everything belongs to someone, my friend. The question is, what are you willing to trade for your life?" Elena's face went white as she recognized the voice through the speaker. "I'm listening," Marcus said. "There's an old church 15 miles east of your current location. San Miguel. Be there in 2 hours. Bring the girl and you walk away rich. Refuse." The line went quiet for a moment. "Well, I think you understand the alternatives. How do I know you'll keep your word?" "You don't, but right now, it's the only offer on the table. Oh, and Marcus, don't think about running. I have people watching every road out of the valley." The line went dead. Elena was shaking now, wrapped in her own arms. "He found us. God, he found us so fast." Marcus pulled her against his chest, feeling her heart hammering like a trapped bird. "He's bluffing about the roads. Has to be." But even as he said it, he spotted headlights in the distance, 3 vehicles moving slowly along the highway, searchlights sweeping the desert on both sides. "We need to move. Now." They gathered their few belongings in minutes. As Marcus kicked his Harley to life, Elena climbed on behind him, her arms tight around his waist. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the engine noise. Marcus gunned the bike toward the back of the motel, where a narrow dirt road snaked into the hills. To even the odds, behind them, the searchlights swept closer, and somewhere in the darkness, Rodriguez's net was tightening. The abandoned gas station sat like a broken tooth against the desert horizon, its rusted pumps casting long shadows in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus cut the engine 50 yards out, coasting the Harley behind a cluster of barrel cacti. The silence pressed against his eardrums after hours of wind and engine noise. He'd been riding hard since leaving Elena at the motel, his mind churning through possibilities and plans. The address Vasquez had given him led here, a way station that appeared on no current maps, a place where desperate cargo changed hands under cover of darkness. Through his binoculars, Marcus counted 3 vehicles, a white panel van with Arizona plates, a black SUV, and an old Ford pickup that had seen better decades. Light flickered through the boarded windows of the station's office, and he could make out at least 2 figures moving inside. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. They moved her. "Dawn delivery. You're too late." Marcus stared at the message, ice forming in his gut. Someone was watching him, had been tracking his movements. He scanned the darkness, seeing nothing but knowing eyes were on him somewhere in the vast emptiness. Another buzz, but you can still save the others. The others. Marcus focused the binoculars on the panel van. Through a gap in the rear door's seal, he caught a glimpse of movement. Someone shifting inside. More than one person. He pulled his jacket tight and checked his. Then the backup piece strapped to his ankle. The knife at his belt felt familiar, comforting. Tools of a trade he'd tried to leave behind, now feeling inevitable in his hands again. Moving through the desert scrub, Marcus approached the station from the rear. The building's back wall had collapsed partially, creating a jagged opening he could slip through. Glass crunched softly under his boots as he eased inside. Voices drifted from the front office, two men speaking in rapid Spanish. Marcus caught fragments, something about schedules, about buyers, about a special order that needed immediate transport. His jaw clenched. Elena's face flashed in his mind, the terror in her eyes when she'd spoken about the other girls. He crept closer, staying low behind the remains of automotive displays. Through a doorway, he could see them clearly now, one tall and thin with prison tattoos covering his arms, the other shorter and heavy-set, wearing an expensive leather jacket that looked out of place in this wasteland. "Problemas con el nuevo," the tattooed one was saying. "She fights too much. Maybe we should—" "No," the heavy-set man cut him off. "She's worth triple the usual rate. The client specifically requested her type. We just need to keep her quiet until we reach the border." Marcus's grip tightened on his knife handle. Every instinct screamed at him to burst through that door and end both men where they stood. But Elena had made him promise. No unnecessary killing, no returning to the monster he used to be. A new sound made him freeze, crying, muffled but audible, coming from outside. The van. His phone vibrated again. Clock's ticking. Border run starts in 10 minutes. The crying grew louder, more desperate. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of choice crushing down on him. He could try to take both men quietly, but if he failed, if they raised an alarm, whoever was behind this operation would vanish like smoke. Elena would never be safe. But those voices in the van, young voices, terrified voices, they were here now, suffering now. Marcus made his choice. He moved with the fluid precision of his former life, muscle memory taking over. The first man never heard him coming. A hand clamped over his mouth, the blade sliding between ribs with surgical accuracy. He lowered the body silently. The second man turned just as Marcus emerged from the shadows. His eyes widened, hand reaching for a gun, but Marcus was already moving. The fight was brief and brutal, ending with the man unconscious on the floor, zip-tied with supplies from Marcus's kit. Keys jangled as Marcus searched their pockets. Outside, he approached the van carefully, speaking softly in Spanish before opening the doors. 3 young women huddled inside, barely more than teenagers, their eyes wide with terror and hope warring in their faces. They flinched as he cut their bonds, whispering reassurances, explaining that he was there to help. His phone rang, unknown number. "Hello, Marcus." The voice was electronically distorted, unrecognizable. "Impressive work. Though I'm disappointed you left one alive." "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching your redemption arc with great interest. You've proven quite useful in identifying our weak points. Consider this a field test." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, understanding washing over him like cold water. He'd been played, manipulated into cleaning house for the very organization he was fighting. But as he looked at the 3 freed women, saw hope returning to their faces, he realized something else. Sometimes being used for the right reasons was its own form of choice. The desert dawn was breaking, painting the sky blood red as they drove away from the abandoned station, leaving the past burning behind them. The motorcycle's engine died with a final rumble as Jake cut the power 50 yards from the compound's perimeter. The silence that followed felt oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of generators and the occasional bark of a guard dog. Through his binoculars, he counted 3 patrol routes, 2 guard towers, and at least 8 armed men visible in the moonlight. Too many for a frontal assault. Too many for anything resembling fair odds. But Jake had stopped believing in fair odds years ago. He'd spent the better part of the afternoon studying the compound from various vantage points, mapping every entrance, every blind spot, every weakness in their security. The trafficking operation had grown careless with success, their guards more focused on keeping people in than watching for threats from outside. That overconfidence would be their downfall. Moving like a shadow, Jake approached the eastern fence line where the desert scrub grew closest to the chain link. His leather jacket caught on the wire as he cut through, the sound barely audible above the wind. Once inside, he pressed himself against a storage shed, letting his eyes adjust to the deeper shadows within the compound. The main house loomed ahead, a sprawling adobe structure that had probably once been someone's ranch home before being converted into this nightmare. Light spilled from several windows on the ground floor, and Jake could hear voices, laughter that made his skin crawl knowing what these men did for a living. A guard rounded the corner of the building, assault rifle slung carelessly across his shoulder. Jake waited until the man passed, then moved in one fluid motion. His arms snaked around the guard's throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery. The man went limp in seconds, and Jake dragged him into the shadows, relieving him of his weapon and radio. Sector 2, checking in, crackled the radio. Jake recognized the voice from his surveillance, the patrol leader making his rounds. Jake keyed the mic, affecting the unconscious guard's gravelly tone. "Sector 4, all clear. Copy that, Rico." The radio went quiet again. Jake estimated he had maybe 10 minutes before someone noticed Rico's absence. 10 minutes to find Elena and get her out. He slipped through a side door into what had once been a kitchen, but now served as some kind of staging area. Boxes of supplies lined the walls, and a corkboard held photographs and documents he didn't want to examine too closely. The images he glimpsed in his peripheral vision were enough to fuel the cold rage building in his chest. Voices drifted from the front room, Vargas and at least 2 others discussing routes and schedules, transportation logistics for human cargo. Jake gritted his teeth and moved toward the staircase, each step calculated to avoid the creaking boards he'd identified during his reconnaissance. The second-floor hallway stretched before him, doors lining both sides. Most stood open, revealing empty rooms or storage areas. But at the far end, light leaked from beneath a closed door, and Jake could hear the soft sound of someone crying. Elena. He approached the door, testing the handle. Locked, but not with anything sophisticated, just a simple deadbolt installed on the outside. Jake pulled out his lockpicks, a skill learned during his darker years that he'd never quite managed to forget. The tumblers gave way after 30 seconds of careful manipulation. Jake eased the door open, weapon ready, expecting another guard or some kind of trap. Instead, he found Elena sitting on a narrow bed, still wearing the tattered remains of her wedding dress. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were red from crying. When she looked up and saw him, those eyes went wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Jake," she whispered, as if afraid speaking his name too loudly might make him disappear. "I told you I'd come back," he said quietly, crossing to her in 2 quick steps. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though he could see the bruises on her wrists where restraints had been too tight. "I knew you would. I don't know why, but I knew." The trust in her voice hit him harder than any physical blow. When had someone last had that kind of faith in him? When had he last deserved it? "We need to go," he said, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" "Yes, I think so." Her legs shook slightly, but she steadied herself against his arm. "Jake, there are others. Girls in the building next door. We can't just leave them." Of course she would think of others even in her own moment of rescue. Jake felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. This woman, this brave, impossible woman, was asking him to be the hero she saw in him. "One thing at a time," he said. "First we get you safe, then we come back for them. Promise me." He met her eyes, seeing steel beneath the tears. "I promise." The radio on his belt crackled to life. "Rico, report your position." Their time was up. The motel room felt smaller now that they'd shared their darkest secrets. Maya sat curled against the headboard, Jake's jacket still wrapped around her shoulders like armor. The harsh fluorescent light made everything look stark, but somehow she felt safer than she had in months. Jake paced near the window, occasionally pulling the curtain aside to scan the parking lot. His movements were fluid, predatory, a man who'd learned to survive by staying alert, but when he glanced at her, something soft flickered in those storm-grey eyes. "We need to move before dawn," he said, checking his phone. Dimitri's people will canvass every motel once they realize we're gone. Maya nodded, though the thought of leaving this temporary sanctuary made her stomach clench. Where will we go? I know a place. An old friend owes me a favor. Jake's jaw tightened. Someone from before I tried to go straight. The weight of what he was giving up for her wasn't lost on Maya. She'd seen the resignation in his face when he'd made that call to Marcus. He was burning bridges with his old life to protect her. The knowledge settled heavy in her chest, part gratitude and part guilt. Jake, her voice was barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Really? He stopped pacing, his back to her. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning unit and distant traffic on the highway. You remember I told you about Elena? His voice was rough, like gravel under tires. My sister, she was 17 when she disappeared. Just gone one day after school. Maya's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Cops said she was a runaway, said girls like her, from our neighborhood with our family history. They always ran, eventually. Jake's hands clenched into fists. But I knew better. Elena wasn't running towards something. She was taken. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Maya understood now why he'd risked everything for a stranger's desperate plea. She wasn't just another victim to him. She was the sister he'd never found, the innocence he'd never been able to protect. Did you ever find out what happened to her? 3 years later, I learned the truth. Jake turned around, and Maya saw the raw pain he usually kept buried. Same operation that took you had taken her. By then, it was too late. She'd been moved overseas, or... He couldn't finish the sentence. Maya slipped off the bed and crossed to him. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for me. His hand covered hers. Be sorry for all the girls like Elena that I didn't save because I was too busy being angry, too busy running drugs and picking fights. You're saving me, maybe, if I don't get us both killed first. Outside, a car engine rumbled to life, and Jake tensed, moving to the window. A sedan was pulling out of the parking lot, just another traveler, not a threat. But the moment reminded them both that they were living on borrowed time. We should get some rest, Jake said. Few hours until we need to move. Maya glanced at the single bed, then at the chair by the window. The thought of being alone with her thoughts, even for a few hours, made her chest tight with panic. The nightmares were always waiting. Would you? She struggled with the words, embarrassed by her own need. Could you stay close? I mean, you don't have to sleep on the bed, but maybe just... He settled into the chair, positioning it so he could see both the door and the window. Maya curled up on top of the covers, still wearing his jacket. The masculine scent of leather and motor oil was becoming familiar, comforting. Jake? Yeah? When this is over, when Dimitri and his people are stopped. What will you do? He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost surprised. I don't know. For the first time in years, I honestly don't know. He paused. What about you? Maya closed her eyes, trying to imagine a future beyond mere survival. I want to help other girls. Ones like Elena, like me, maybe work with organizations that fight trafficking. That's good. That's something Elena would have wanted to do, I think. The silence that followed felt different than before, not heavy with secrets, but warm with possibility. Maya felt herself drifting towards sleep, her body finally relaxing despite the danger surrounding them. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? For showing me that some people are worth trusting. In the chair by the window, Jake smiled for the first time in longer than he could remember. The abandoned gas station sat like a broken tooth against the starlit horizon, its rusted sign creaking in the desert wind. Marcus crouched behind his Harley, watching the building through night vision binoculars he'd lifted from a military surplus store 3 towns back. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, their cigarette tips glowing orange in the darkness. Elena was in there, He could feel it in his bones, the same certainty that had kept him alive through countless club wars and back-alley deals. Vasquez had chosen well. The location was isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry, but close enough to the highway that transport would be easy. His phone vibrated. A text from Jake, sheriff's office compromised. Rawlings on Vasquez payroll. "You're on your own." Marcus deleted the message and slipped the phone into his jacket. He'd been on his own before. The difference now was that someone else's life hung in the balance, someone whose courage had carved itself into his chest like a brand. He studied the building's layout, counting windows and mapping exit routes. The main entrance faced the road, but there was a service door on the east side and what looked like a loading bay in back. 3 vehicles sat in the gravel lot, 2 black SUVs and Vasquez's silver Mercedes. A scream pierced the night air, high and desperate. Elena. Every muscle in Marcus's body coiled tight. His hand moved instinctively to the Glock tucked against his ribs, but he forced himself to remain still. Charging in blind would get them both killed. He needed to be smart about this, surgical. The scream came again, weaker this time, followed by harsh laughter. Marcus closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him, storing it like fuel. When he opened them again, the last traces of hesitation had burned away. He circled wide, using the scattered Joshua trees and abandoned cars as cover. The guards were sloppy, more focused on their conversation than their surroundings. Marcus recognized the type, street muscle who thought intimidation was enough, who'd never learned that real danger moved silently. Marcus approached from behind, his motorcycle boots silent on the hard-packed earth. The guards started to turn, perhaps sensing movement, but Marcus's knife found the soft spot between his neck and shoulder. The man dropped like a stone. Inside the building, voices echoed off concrete walls. Marcus pressed his ear to the service door and counted at least 4 distinct speakers, all male, all speaking Spanish. He caught fragments of conversation, talk of schedules and transport, of merchandise and buyers. His jaw clenched. Elena wasn't a person to them. She was inventory. The service door opened onto a narrow hallway lined with storage rooms. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sickly shadows that danced with each electrical surge. Marcus moved forward, the Glock now in his hand, safety off. The voices grew louder as he approached what had once been the station's main office. Through a crack in the door, he could see Elena tied to a metal chair, her wedding dress torn and dirty, but her spine still straight. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eye, but her gaze remained defiant. Vasquez stood in front of her, his expensive suit incongruous in the decrepit surroundings. 2 more men flanked the windows, automatic weapons at the ready. A 4th man worked at a laptop computer, probably coordinating the sale. "The buyer will be here within the hour," Vasquez was saying. "I suggest you prepare yourself mentally. He has very specific tastes, and your cooperation will determine how unpleasant the experience becomes." Elena lifted her chin. "Go to hell." Vasquez backhanded her across the face. The sound cracked through the air like a whip, and something primal roared to life in Marcus's chest. His finger tightened on the trigger, but he forced himself to wait. One shot would bring the others running, and the room's layout gave them too many advantages. Instead, he pulled a smoke grenade from his jacket, another gift from the surplus store. He counted to 3, then kicked open the door and rolled the canister into the center of the room. Chaos erupted as thick grey smoke filled the space. Shouts and gunfire echoed off the walls, muzzle flashes strobing through the haze like deadly lightning. Marcus moved through it all like a ghost, his years of experience guiding him unerringly toward Elena's chair. He found her by touch, his fingers recognizing the silk of her ruined dress. Her body tensed until he whispered in her ear, "It's me. Stay low." The zip ties around her wrists parted under his knife blade. She gripped his arm with desperate strength, her nails digging through leather and into skin. Around them the smoke was beginning to clear, revealing confused figures stumbling through the dissipating haze. "Can you run?" Marcus breathed. Elena nodded, her eyes fierce despite the fear swimming in their depths. together. The first gunshot shattered the desert silence like breaking glass. Marcus dove behind the rusted pickup truck, pulling Elena down with him as bullets sparked off metal and kicked up dirt around their feet. The warehouse had erupted into chaos the moment they'd breached the loading dock. "How many?" Elena gasped, her wedding dress torn and stained with dust. "Too many," Marcus growled, checking his ammunition. The Glock felt familiar in his hands, muscle memory from a life he'd tried to leave behind. "Stay low." Through the maze of shipping containers and abandoned vehicles, muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Marcus counted at least 6 shooters, maybe more. Kozlov's men had been ready for them, which meant someone had talked or they'd walked straight into a trap. There, Elena pointed toward a side entrance where 2 figures were dragging struggling women toward a waiting truck. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see the terror on their faces, the same helpless desperation Elena had worn when he'd first found her. Something primal ignited in his chest. These bastards had turned human suffering into profit, and they weren't walking away tonight. "When I move, you run for that concrete barrier," he told Elena, nodding toward a low wall 30 yards away. "Don't look back, don't stop. What about you? I'll be right behind you." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Elena nodded anyway, understanding that survival sometimes required ugly choices. Marcus broke cover like a man possessed, the Harley-Davidson patches on his leather vest fluttering as he sprinted toward the nearest gunman. The element of surprise bought him precious seconds. His first shot took down a trafficker aiming for Elena's escape route. The second caught another man center mass as he emerged from behind a container. But the warehouse was a kill box, and Marcus found himself pinned down behind a concrete pillar as automatic weapons fire chewed up the walls around him. Dust and concrete chips rained down, and he could taste cordite in the air. "You should have minded your own business, biker." Kozlov's accented voice echoed through the space. "Now you die with the merchandise." The casual dehumanization in those words made Marcus's blood boil. He'd spent years running from violence, trying to be better than the man who'd left bodies in his wake. But some sins could only be washed clean with blood. A shadow moved to his left. Marcus spun and fired, watching a gunman crumple. 3 down, but more kept coming. Where the hell was Rico with the backup he'd promised? The answer came in the form of roaring engines and blazing headlights as a convoy of motorcycles burst through the warehouse's main entrance. The Serpents had arrived in force, their battle cries mixing with gunfire as they scattered Kozlov's remaining men. Marcus used the chaos to advance, moving from cover to cover with predatory focus. A lifetime of violence had taught him to read a battlefield, to find the spaces between bullets where death couldn't reach him. He was the angel of retribution, his old crew had called him, and tonight he embraced that darkness. He found Kozlov near the back of the warehouse, the trafficker's expensive suit incongruous among the industrial decay. The Russian was screaming orders at his remaining men while trying to reach an emergency exit. Going somewhere? Marcus emerged from the shadows, gun trained on Kozlov's center mass. The trafficker turned slowly, his cold eyes taking in Marcus's torn leather and bleeding knuckles. "You have cost me a great deal of money tonight." "Good. Those women aren't merchandise. Everyone is merchandise, biker. Even you have a price." Kozlov's hand inched toward his waistband, but Marcus was faster. The shot echoed through the warehouse, and the trafficker crumpled against a shipping container, clutching his shoulder. "That's for Elena," Marcus said, advancing. "This is for all the others." But before he could finish it, Rico's voice cut through the diminishing gunfire. "Marcus, cops are coming. We need to move." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and Marcus hesitated. The old hymn would have put 2 in Kozlov's chest and walked away. But Elena had changed something fundamental inside him, shown him that mercy could be its own kind of strength. Instead, he zip-tied the wounded trafficker to a support beam and pocketed the man's phone. Evidence that would put him away forever, assuming the justice system did its job. Elena appeared at his shoulder, her eyes wide as she took in the carnage. "Is it over?" "This part is," Marcus said, holstering his weapon. Around them, the other rescued women were being led to safety by Rico's men. But Kozlov was small time. There are bigger fish out there. As they walked toward the exit, Elena slipped her hand into his. Her touch was warm against his bloodied knuckles, a reminder that even in the darkest places, something pure could survive. The sirens were getting closer, but Marcus wasn't running anymore. Some fights were worth the consequences. The warehouse stretched before them like a concrete tomb, its corrugated walls echoing with distant voices and the rumble of engines. Jack pressed himself against the loading dock, feeling the familiar weight of his 45 against his ribs. Beside him, Elena's breathing came in short, controlled bursts, her fingers white-knuckled around the pistol he'd given her. 3 guards at the main entrance, Marcus whispered through the comm, his voice crackling with static. 2 more patrolling the perimeter. Santos is inside with at least a dozen men. Jack closed his eyes, centering himself. Every instinct screamed at him to charge in guns blazing, to tear through anyone standing between him and Elena's freedom. But he'd learned patience in the hardest ways possible, and patience would keep them both alive. "Remember the plan," he murmured to Elena. "Stay behind me until we reach the office. Then you run." Her dark eyes flashed with defiance. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "You are if I say you are." His voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded respect in the darkest corners of the world. "This isn't about heroics. It's about getting you out alive." The first guard never saw him coming. Jack's arm snaked around the man's throat, applying pressure until the body went limp. The second turned at the sound of his partner's muffled gasp, but Elena was already moving. The butt of her pistol connected with his temple in a precise strike that dropped him instantly. "Nice work," Jack whispered, genuinely impressed. They dragged the unconscious guards behind a stack of shipping containers and slipped through the side door. The warehouse's interior was a maze of crates and machinery, harsh fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows across the concrete floor. Voices carried from the far end, Santos's voice rising above the others in animated Spanish. Jack led them deeper into the maze, using the containers as cover. Through gaps in the stacked cargo, he caught glimpses of the operation that had terrorized this desert town for months. Girls huddled in makeshift cells, their eyes hollow with fear and resignation. Men with automatic weapons stood guard, casual in their cruelty. The sight ignited something primal in Jack's chest, a rage that had nothing to do with tactics or survival and everything to do with justice. These weren't rival gang members or fellow criminals. They were predators feeding on innocence. Elena's sharp intake of breath told him she'd seen the same thing. Her free hand found his arm, fingers digging into the leather of his jacket. For a moment, they stood frozen in shared horror. "We can't leave them," she whispered. "We will come back for them," he promised, meaning every word. "But first, we end Santos." They moved forward through the industrial labyrinth, each step bringing them closer to the voices. Santos was explaining something to his men, his tone confident and dismissive. He was describing transport routes, talking about moving merchandise before the heat died down. Jack's finger found the trigger of his weapon. 3 more steps and they'd have a clear shot at the office where Santos held court. 3 more steps and this nightmare would begin to end. But the universe had other plans. A metal container shifted behind them. Just a whisper of sound, but enough to alert the guard they hadn't seen. The man shouted in Spanish, his voice cutting through the warehouse like an air raid siren. Santos's conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Run!" Jack snarled, pushing Elena toward the office even as gunfire erupted around them. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the shadows like deadly fireworks, while bullets sparked off metal and shattered concrete. Jack returned fire, his movements fluid and economical as he carved a path through Santos's men. Years of violence had honed him into a weapon, but tonight he fought for something beyond survival. Elena moved beside him like she'd been born to this chaos, her shots precise and devastating. Santos's voice rose above the gunfire, screaming orders in 2 languages, his careful operation crumbling around him. They reached the office stairs just as reinforcements poured through the main entrance. Jack turned to lay down covering fire, but Elena was already moving, taking the steps 3 at a time. Through the office window, he could see Santos frantically destroying documents, his face twisted with panic and rage. The final confrontation waited just beyond that door. Everything Jack had been, everything he hoped to become, would be decided in the next few minutes. He fed a fresh magazine into his pistol and followed Elena up the stairs, ready to face whatever waited in the darkness above. The convoy of black SUVs kicked up dust clouds as they approached the compound, their engines growling like predators closing in for the kill. Jake counted at least 8 vehicles through the scope of his rifle, positioned on the ridge overlooking the desert facility. His jaw tightened as he recognized the lead vehicle, Kozlov's armored Mercedes, the same one that had haunted his nightmares for 3 years. "They're early," Marcus whispered through the radio, his voice crackling with static from his position near the compound's rear entrance. Jake's finger found the trigger guard as memories flooded back, the botched arms deal in Moscow, the explosion that had killed innocents, the reason he'd fled into exile on these desert roads. Kozlov had orchestrated it all, using Jake's reputation to cover his own tracks. Now the Russian crime lord had come to collect what he believed was owed. "Elena, you copy?" Jake's voice was steady despite the rage building in his chest. "I'm here." Her response came from inside the compound, where she was helping coordinate the evacuation of the other victims. "The last group is moving to the safe room now." The SUVs formed a semicircle around the main building, their occupants spilling out with military precision. Jake counted 23 armed men, all carrying assault rifles. Through his scope, he caught sight of Kozlov himself, a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit that looked absurd in the desert heat. Mikhail Kozlov's amplified voice boomed across the compound through a megaphone. "I know you're here. 3 years is long enough to play this game." Jake's real name hung in the air like a death sentence. He'd been Michael Volkov once, a different man in a different life. That man had made choices that led to innocent blood being spilled. That man had run when he should have stood and fought. "Bring me the girl and we can discuss terms," Kozlov continued. "She's worth more than you know." Through his earpiece, Jake heard Elena's sharp intake of breath. He'd suspected there was more to her story, something beyond simple trafficking. The way Kozlov spoke about her specifically confirmed his fears. "Elena," he said quietly, "what aren't you telling me?" A silence stretched long enough that Jake thought the connection had cut out. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "My father, he testified against Kozlov's organization 5 years ago. Kozlov swore he'd make our family pay." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't random trafficking, it was revenge. Elena's capture had been deliberate, personal. Jake closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the cruel symmetry of fate that had brought them together. "Movement on the east side," Marcus reported. 6 men breaking off from the main group. Jake tracked the splinter team through his scope. They were heading for the building's service entrance, the same route Elena would need to use if they had to evacuate. He was already moving before he'd fully processed the decision, abandoning his sniper position to descend the rocky slope. The first man never saw Jake coming. A knife between the ribs dropped him silently in the shadow of the building. Jake appropriated the man's rifle and moved toward the next target, muscle memory from his old life taking over. He'd forgotten how efficient he could be when protecting something that mattered. 2 more men fell before the remaining 3 realized they were being hunted. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the desert rocks as Jake dove for cover behind a concrete barrier. Bullets chipped away at his shelter, sending fragments flying. "Jake!" Elena's voice crackled through his earpiece, tight with fear. "Stay down," he replied, popping up to return fire. His shots were precise, economical. Another attacker dropped. Inside the compound, he could hear Kozlov growing impatient. "Burn it down," the Russian ordered. "Flush them out." The smell of gasoline began to drift on the desert wind. Jake cursed under his breath. They were out of time. He sprinted toward the building's side entrance, knowing Elena would emerge there if she followed their evacuation plan. She appeared just as he reached the door, her white dress now stained with dust and fear. Behind her came a stream of frightened women and children, the other victims they'd been working to save. This way, Jake guided them toward the escape route Marcus had mapped out, but Kozlov's men were already repositioning to cut them off. The compound erupted in flames behind them as Jake realized the terrible arithmetic of their situation. There were too many civilians to move quickly, too many gunmen to fight through, and nowhere to run in the open desert. Elena looked at him with those dark eyes that had haunted his thoughts since the moment he'd first seen her. In them, he saw not just trust, but something deeper, a faith that he could be the man she needed him to be. For the first time in 3 years, Jake Ryder felt ready to stop running from his past and face whatever came next. The convoy of black SUVs kicked up clouds of desert dust as they approached the compound, their engines growling like mechanical predators. Marcus crouched behind a boulder 50 yards from the main gate, watching through binoculars as armed men poured from the vehicles. His jaw clenched when he recognized Viktor Kozlov stepping out of the lead SUV, the Russian crime lord's scarred face twisted into a cold smile. Jake's voice crackled back from his position near the rear entrance. How many? 12, maybe 15, and they brought the heavy hitter himself. "Sarah, get them ready to move, but stay put until I give the signal," he ordered, then switched frequencies to contact Detective Rodriguez. "We need backup now. This thing just went from bad to worse." Rodriguez's response was grim. "ETA 15 minutes. Can you hold that long?" Marcus watched as Kozlov's men spread out around the compound, their tactical movements precise and professional. These weren't street thugs. They were military-trained killers. "Guess we'll find out." Inside the compound, Elena pressed herself against the wall of her cell, listening to the commotion above. Heavy footsteps echoed through the building, accompanied by shouting in Russian and English. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized Victor's voice, its cultured accent making her skin crawl. The basement door slammed open, and Victor descended the stairs with 2 guards flanking him. His expensive suit looked out of place in the grimy underground chamber, but his presence filled the space with malevolent authority. "My dear Elena," he said, his smile never reaching his cold blue eyes. "Did you really think you could escape me? That some broken-down biker could protect you?" Elena lifted her chin defiantly, even as terror coursed through her veins. "Marcus will stop you." Victor laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Your knight in leather armor is already dead, I'm afraid. My men have excellent aim." The lie hit Elena like a physical blow, but she forced herself not to show weakness. She'd learned too much about men like Victor over the past months. They fed on fear like parasites. Above ground, Marcus was proving very much alive as he moved through the compound's shadows like a ghost. His years of military training had never fully left him, and now every lesson in stealth and combat came flooding back. He took down 2 guards silently, using pressure points and chokeholds that left them unconscious but breathing. The compound's layout was burned into his memory from the surveillance photos. He moved toward the basement entrance, knowing Elena was somewhere below ground. His hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system, he checked his weapon and prepared for what came next. Jake's voice whispered through the comm. "Marcus, they've got guards posted at every exit. We're surrounded." "Then we go through them," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a deadly calm that would have made his old army squad proud. "Sarah, how are those girls?" "Ready to move, but they're weak. Some of them can barely walk." Marcus's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to charge in, to tear the place apart with his bare hands. But he forced himself to think tactically. Lives depended on getting this right. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the desert air, still distant but growing stronger. Kozlov had heard them too. Marcus could see the crime lord through a window, barking orders at his men. The situation was about to explode into chaos. "Change of plans," Marcus said into his radio. "Sarah, start moving those girls toward the north wall. Jake, create a distraction at the front gate. I'm going for Elena." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Every second counted now. The basement stairs loomed ahead, guarded by a single man whose attention was focused on the approaching police sirens. Marcus moved like striking lightning, his combat knife finding the guard's neck in a precise, non-lethal strike that dropped him instantly. The basement stretched before him, poorly lit and reeking of fear and desperation. He could hear Victor's voice ahead, along with Elena's defiant responses. Pride and terror warred in his chest, pride at her courage, terror at what Victor might do to her. The corridor opened into a larger chamber lined with cells. Marcus's blood boiled at the sight. This was a processing center, a way station in human misery, but his focus narrowed to the figure of Victor Kozlov standing before one particular cell, a gun now visible in his manicured hand. "Victor!" Marcus called out, stepping into the light. "Let's finish this!" The warehouse erupted in chaos as Jake's Harley crashed through the main entrance, sending splinters of wood and metal flying in every direction. The deafening roar of the engine mixed with shouts of alarm from Dimitri's men as they scrambled for cover behind shipping containers and makeshift barriers. Jake rolled off his bike as bullets whistled past his head, the hot desert air thick with gun smoke and dust. His shoulder screamed in protest from his earlier wound, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Somewhere in this maze of concrete and steel, Elena was waiting for him. "You should have stayed dead, Rodriguez." Dimitri's voice echoed from the shadows near the back of the warehouse. "Now you'll watch your precious bride die before I put you in the ground permanently." A muzzle flash illuminated the darkness to Jake's left. He dove behind a stack of wooden crates, splinters exploding around him as automatic weapons fire chewed through his cover. The familiar weight of his .45 felt reassuring in his grip, but he was outnumbered at least 6-1. Through a gap in the containers, he caught a glimpse of Elena tied to a chair on an elevated platform near Dimitri's position. Even from this distance, he could see the defiance in her posture, the way she held her head high despite everything they'd put her through. That sight filled him with a protective fury he'd never experienced before. Moving low and fast, Jake flanked left toward a cluster of oil drums. A gunman emerged from behind a forklift, assault rifle raised, but Jake was faster. 2 quick shots dropped the man before he could fire. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance told him the authorities were finally closing in, but he couldn't wait for backup. "Elena!" he called out, needing to know she was alive. "Jake!" Her voice carried across the warehouse, strong and clear. "There are 4 more behind the blue containers." Smart girl. Even bound and terrified, she was feeding him tactical information. He'd never loved her more than in that moment. Jake sprinted toward the blue shipping containers she'd indicated, drawing fire away from her position. Bullets sparked off metal and concrete as he dove and rolled, using his years of military training and outlaw experience to stay ahead of the crosshairs. A shadow moved above him on the catwalk. Jake spun and fired upward, the figure tumbling down with a crash. 3 left, plus Dimitri. The Russian crime boss appeared on the platform beside Elena, pressing a chrome pistol against her temple. "Enough games, Rodriguez. Show yourself or she dies right now." Jake's blood turned to ice. He'd seen Dimitri execute prisoners before. The man never bluffed about killing. Through the maze of containers, Jake could see Elena's face clearly now. She wasn't looking at Dimitri or the gun, she was looking directly at Jake, and her expression held no fear, only trust, complete, absolute trust that he would save her. That trust terrified him more than all of Dimitri's threats combined. "You want me, Dimitri?" Jake stepped into the open, hands raised but still gripping his weapon. "Here I am. Let her go and we'll settle this between us." Dimitri laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "Still playing the hero? You were always too sentimental for this business. That's why you could never be like me." "Thank God for that." Jake replied, taking another careful step forward. The remaining gunman emerged from cover, weapons trained on him, but Jake only had eyes for Elena. She was trying to tell him something with her gaze, glancing repeatedly towards something behind Dimitri. Then Jake saw it. Elena had been working at her bonds. The rope around her left wrist was nearly severed. She was waiting for the right moment. "You know what your problem is, Rodriguez?" Dimitri continued his monologue, clearly savoring what he believed was his moment of triumph. "You think love makes you stronger, but it only makes you weak, predictable. It's why you're going to die tonight." "Maybe," Jake said quietly, meeting Elena's eyes one more time. "But I'd rather die for love than live without it." Elena's slight nod told him she was ready. Jake dove left as Elena broke free and threw herself sideways off the platform. Dimitri's shot went wide as chaos erupted again. The remaining gunman opened fire, but Jake was already moving, his military training taking over completely. 2 quick engagements dropped 2 more men. Through the smoke and confusion, Jake saw Dimitri advancing on Elena with murder in his eyes. There was no clean shot, too much distance, too many obstacles. Jake ran toward them, knowing he'd never make it in time. Elena scrambled behind an overturned table as Dimitri raised his weapon. "You cost me everything, girl. Time to pay the price." The chrome pistol glinted in the harsh warehouse lighting as Dimitri's finger tightened on the trigger. The sirens had long since faded into the distance, taking Viktor Kozlov and his remaining associates toward justice. Jake stood in the doorway of the abandoned warehouse, watching as the last police cruiser disappeared down the desert highway. His knuckles were split and bleeding, his leather jacket torn, but he was alive. More importantly, so was she. Elena sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while a paramedic checked her vitals. Even in the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency vehicle, she was beautiful. More than that, she was free. The sight of her breathing freely, no longer trapped behind locked doors, made every brutal moment of the last 3 days worth it. "You should let them look at those cuts," she said as he approached, her voice still carrying that slight accent that had haunted his dreams. "I've had worse." Jake flexed his fingers, ignoring the sting. "How are you holding up?" She managed a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen since finding her in that locked room. "Better now. The FBI agent says they've been tracking this ring for months. Because of what we found here, they'll be able to shut down operations in 4 other states. We did good then." "You did good." Elena's eyes found his, and he saw something there that made his chest tight. "You saved my life, Jake. You barely knew me, but you risked everything." He wanted to tell her that saving her had saved him too, that somewhere in those moments of fighting for her freedom, he'd found a piece of his soul he thought was lost forever. Instead, he just nodded. Detective Morrison approached them, closing his notebook with a satisfied snap. "We've got enough evidence to put Kozlov away for 3 lifetimes. The truck driver's already talking, gave us names and locations we didn't even know about." He looked at Jake with something that might have been respect. "Hell of a thing you did here, Ryder. Just did what anyone should have done." "No," Morrison said firmly. "You did what most people wouldn't have the guts to do. There's a difference." As the detective walked away, Elena slipped down from the ambulance. The blanket fell away, revealing the simple dress she'd been wearing when this nightmare began. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "So, what happens now?" she asked quietly. Jake had been dreading that question. In a few hours she'd be processed, debriefed, probably taken to a safe house until the trials began. Eventually she'd rebuild her life, maybe go back to school, start the career she'd dreamed of. She'd heal from this trauma and move forward, as she should. And him? He'd go back to the road, back to the endless miles of asphalt and the solitude he'd grown accustomed to, except now that solitude would feel different. Now he knew what it was like to have something, someone worth fighting for. "The FBI will take good care of you," he said. "Make sure you're safe while they build their case. After that," he shrugged. "After that, you can go anywhere, do anything. You're free." Elena stepped closer, and he caught the faint scent of her perfume beneath the desert dust. I wasn't asking about me, Jake. I was asking about us. The word hung in the air between them, like a promise and a question all at once. Us. 3 days ago, he wouldn't have believed such a thing was possible for someone like him. I'm not exactly relationship material, he said roughly. I've got a record, a past that... Do you think I care about any of that? Elena's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his, despite the blood on his knuckles. You showed me who you really are. Not the man you used to be, but the man you are now. The man who heard a stranger calling for help and couldn't walk away. Jake stared down at their joined hands. Her skin was soft, unmarked by the violence that had shaped his life. She deserved better than a broken-down biker with more regrets than redemption. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something he'd never dared hope for. Acceptance, not of his past, but of his choice to leave it behind. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Normal, building something instead of tearing it down. Elena smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. In the distance, the sun was beginning to rise over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It felt like the first sunrise Jake had really seen in years, the first one that promised something better than what came before. He squeezed Elena's hand gently. One day at a time, he agreed, and for the first time since he could remember, Jake Ryder looked toward tomorrow without fear.